Hi, I'm Sahana.
I'm Meghana.
And this is Shankari, our co-host and co-producer.
Today we're going to be talking about two stories, The Revolt of Mother by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman and Dayar Padam or Penance of the Goddess by Jeyamohan in the book Stories of the Truth translated by Priyambala.
First of all, I'll just give us a quick summary of Penance of the Goddess. So this story follows a young man who's talking with his friends initially. They're all talking about this temple that is kind of off the shore, and the temple is the impression of they say it's the impression of a goddess's foot, and there's only one impression because her other foot was held upright in the air in penance. Okay, so they kind of think about this and they're like, oh, that's such an interesting sentiment. Then they move on to other conversation topics and they end up talking about how their relations are to music, right? And the main character starts talking about his family. He's talking about his grandmother and his grandfather. So his grandfather was a huge music person. He was huge on Carnatic music. He was very good at it, and he had very wide renown. And that's kind of how he lived his life, like in the pursuit of, for the purpose of music. And then it talks about his wife, who, when she was a child, she was really interested in music. And the grandfather's father, okay, he had listened to this girl sing, and just from that, he was like, this girl is going to get married to my son because her voice is so captivating. I don't even need to see her face. However, her family couldn't pay her dowry, so she just ended up coming with him on her own, without her family paying anything. And because of that, the grandfather's dad doesn't let her family visit her at all. So after that, even though she was very interested in singing, she just stopped singing entirely. And it just details her kind of tumultuous relationship with the grandfather, because there was some issues, like when his father eventually fell ill, he was kind of bedridden all the time. Both the grandfather and the grandmother would take care of him religiously, but one day the grandfather finds his father just lying in his own filth, his own waste, and he just pours that waste on the grandmother's head once he figures out this is what happened. And it just looks at the difference between the two of them, and it just takes the phrase "the penance of the goddess" and expands on that. Do you want to explain why?
Yeah, sure. So when I was reading the story, it was really interesting because in Tamil, Tayar, Thai means mother. So it's even cooler because we think of it as penance of the goddess, in this case the goddess of mother, right? So then when we look further into the story, we see this grandmother, right? And she's when she was married at a very young age to this guy, and she's not allowed to see her family. I don't even think she's not allowed to visit her
family.
And
her family isn't allowed to visit her at all. Her father comes and he tries to meet with her, but then the grandfather's dad says, look, if she decides to leave out of her own free will, she can never come back again. So her father is kind of okay, this is the best life she can live, and he's like, this is the best thing for my daughter, so please leave her with this poor man's blessing. That's all I can give her.
And so then this kind of obviously is going to affect you. How would you react if you were not allowed to see your family or the people that you've been living with ever again?
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously that's going to have a really negative effect on how you develop and grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's kind of how does she resist or rebel against this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason why he married her in the first place was because of her beautiful voice, right? The grandfather's father was she has such a beautiful voice, she should get married to my son.
Mm-hmm.
And the son appreciated her for her beautiful voice as well.
Mm-hmm.
But after they get married, she just doesn't sing. She just absolutely just stops singing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of that is a penance that she takes, in that she says, if you keep me from seeing my family, why should I offer you this gift that I've been given?
Mm-hmm.
Why should I share with you this talent that I've developed around people I love? You are not worthy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that's really cool, or not cool in the story, but interesting rather, is that near the end of the story where like Sahana described, the grandfather kind of dumps this waste on her. It can also be shown as the penance for that. She's shown to be kind of outcasted by the family.
Because what eventually ends up happening is she just repeats the same routines over and over again, and she does them to extreme conditions. So they end up just like not talking to her, not interacting with her, just letting her do whatever she wants. And like I don't know, it's that's very like heartbreaking to me. But
Yeah.
like that complete outcastment. Like she doesn't even meet her own husband at all. Like
Yeah,
they
exactly.
stay separated from each other completely.
It's what is particularly striking about that scene is that kind of like it kind of digs at you because it's like the way that she gains independence is by practicing those own routines by herself. It's kind of like through isolation, like
Mm-hmm.
independence through this isolation from other people,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the narrator of the story. He has this like deep love and respect for his grandmother, which you can see through the narration style in that he kind of says that, oh, my grandmother had like such a beautiful voice, she was such a amazing woman,
Mm-hmm.
but then she was restricted by these like people around her and like forced to conform and deal with all of this stuff around. She had to deal with human waste being poured on her.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he says it, he describes how he never took up singing, and
Yeah,
he describes how like he in fact could have, maybe if he tried harder, but he just never tried. He just thought like
that's not specifically what he says though. What he
hmm,
says is that if anybody other than my grandfather had taught me music,
yeah.
I might have been able to sing.
Hmm.
Because when my grandfather was teaching me music, my mind's tongue wasn't connecting to my physical tongue. So I wasn't able to make music properly. So he specifically says, and everybody refers to this, he had music in his fingers, but not in his like mouth, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is some sort of like unconscious or conscious continuation of his grandmother's penance,
Penance. Yeah.
right? Like there's probably some part of him which is like it's unconscious, like he's not controlling it, but I think some part of him is doing it because he needs to continue standing on one leg. Like when his grandmother ended up getting kind of like she wasn't functioning properly completely, um the doctor described it as one of her mind's legs is off the ground. Everybody else is standing on the ground with 2 feet, but she's just standing on the ground with 1 foot. And he kind of says this in a mocking way, but in a sense, that's what she was aiming for. She wanted to do that in order to take her penance, and he's continuing that by not singing.
Exactly. Like, wait, the way he shows his devotion and respect to his grandmother, and again, it's not revealed if it's fully unconsciously or consciously, but it's kind of like this decent mix of both. It's kind of like he himself, like like Sana says, he continues his grandmother's penance into the future, and he says like, I respect her, and I want to continue this penance and remember her legacy,
Mm-hmm.
and like kind of like remember her as this woman who could have been great if she had not been so restricted. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like how rebellion we think of as like loud and bright and like huge and like shouting and yelling and revolting and like all of these kinds of things, and that is certainly a form of rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
But rebellion, as we can see in this story, can also be shown through this quiet protest where this where it can just be like a grandmother refusing to sing, where silence is often the loudest reason of rebellion.
Yeah, and then I feel like the perfect ending for the story is the one that it got. It's the one where he's saying like, "Oh, actually, the first story I ever wrote was about my grandmother, was
Mm-hmm.
about Pati." And then his friend is like, "Oh, which one?" And then he's like, "It's this vision I have on her of her in my mind." With a head full of flowers, sporting an adige necklace, and draped in a silk sari, she sings at a gathering, melting and dissolving in the memory. So in the melody, and then that's the vision of her that he has, the person who was able to sing, the person who was freed from her penance, and maybe in her afterlife she is freed from her penance indeed. The second story we want to discuss really connects to the themes of the first story, and it is
The Revolt of Mother by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. So, this story is about this woman who is living. She has a husband and some like two kids, I think. And so then her, oh yeah, that was right, right? She has two.
she has 2 kids.
Okay,
She
you were
has,
giving me. I felt like you were
no,
giving me. The
okay,
wrong.
no, I wasn't looking at you at all.
Okay, right.
Like 2 of her kids died, and the one who
Okay, right.
don't that's not relevant
Yeah.
though. Like it was everybody died back
Yeah.
then.
There you go.
I'm not gonna go while you're adjusting your hair. The second story we wanted to discuss really connects to the first story, and it is The Revolt of Mother by
Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. Yeah. So this story, right? I'll give a short summary. Is there's this woman. She has two children and a husband, and she's thinking about like what her husband is doing in the plot next to their land, or like near their land. She's like building something, and she wants to know what. And when she eventually figures out that he's building a barn, and she's really worried because the funds that could be used to build a barn could actually be used to build a better house for them. The house that they're in is livable, but it's definitely not ideal. A lot of it is shabby and ruined, and it's such a concern to her, not for herself, but because she has a daughter that's of marriageable age and she's going to get married, and the house is in no condition for her daughter to get married in. It's just not a house like that. And she doesn't want her daughter to have to go through the shame of getting married in a really shabby, shoddy house. And so then she tries to voice these concerns to her husband. She tries telling him like, "Hey, we need to fix this. Like, look at these rooms. Look at everything here. Look at these fraying floors. Look at everything here. I need you to fix this house." But he just thinks that she's saying things, and he's like, "All right, whatever. Like, who cares?" And then he goes back and builds and continues building the barn. Eventually, once he's built the barn, he leaves to get a new horse. And once when he's out of town, the mother of the story, she says, "All right, we're not taking this behavior anymore. We're going to move into the barn." And she takes her kids, who are very, very scared. They are both scared to speak up to their father, and they're not in a position to. Because in those times, in the times that the story was written, which is like I believe early like 1800s period, it's just not permissible for like kids to like just speak up and like immediately like yell at their parents. It's like not really respectful. So there's nothing they can say. And so she says, "Let's just move in." And so she takes all their stuff, goes to the barn, and then tells all like the workers and helpers at their house to move all of the animals into the house. And so then she is setting up her kitchen and she's cooking everything, and the town is gossiping about all of this because it's a really small town, so news travels really fast. So everyone's like, "Oh, have you heard of this like crazy woman who's like moving into the barn and she pushed all the animals to their house?" And she doesn't care. Like the mother in the story just has one resolve, and that's that they are going to live in a great house and her daughter is going to get married in an amazing house, and this is the way to do it. And so eventually a priest comes over to their house, presumably to talk her out of this idea, to advise her against this. And she, she's very polite, but she's very strong with him. And she says, "The only person that I'm listening to anymore is God, and that is it. And God is telling me that I get to deserve to live in this barn. Like, God is telling me that I deserve to live in a very, a roomy, big space that I can actually enjoy living in. And, I'm just going to do what God tells me to do." And so then eventually her husband comes back, and he is very just surprised because he opens his house and then he just sees a bunch of animals there. And when he goes back to his wife, he's not mad. He's just so shocked that she would do something like this. And she like sits him down for dinner. She's cooked his favorite meal, and then he sits down, eats, and then afterwards he sits outside and he starts crying. And she's like, "I never meant to make you cry." And he says, "Don't worry, I'll move absolutely everything into the here. I'll build you whatever you will like. I'll make all the furniture you want. I never knew you wanted it this badly."
Mm-hmm.
And so then that is basically the story.
Mm-hmm.
My thoughts about, or actually, let's start with your thoughts about this.
One thing I actually really, really enjoyed about the story is the language that's used in the story, which is not something I typically say about something that was written in the late 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, it's like old writing. Like, I don't usually expect much. But the writing in this story particularly was so compelling because you can see from the very start that she has that independence in her. Because when they're describing her as, like, she's, like, small, her head was mild and benevolent, but her eyes looked like the meekness that she had been a result of her own will, never the will of another. So that she's like kind of like a hidden weapon, right? Like the only reason she hasn't spoken up is because she's been okay with her life so far. Like the reason she's so quiet is because she's satisfied with everything that's going on. So she's never had to express her dissatisfaction. And that's why it's so surprising to everybody around her when she like suddenly goes like, "Okay, I'm gonna move everybody into the new house. That's what we're doing." And when the priest comes over, like when she expresses her opinion so strongly and she tells him like, "Look, like thank you for your presence. Like I know you're trying to do the best thing for us, but this business is between me, my husband, and God. So like there's no need for you to get involved." And he leaves and he's so confused. He's so like genuinely perplexed as he just leaves the house because she's just expressed her opinion so strongly and it's so antithetical to her behaviors thus far. But you have to remember, it's not a break in character. This has always been her character. She's just never had to show it. And like another really cool thing, of course this is just also the time period, but they refer to each other as mother and father. the husband and wife, right? So when it really just cements the rules that the reason she's doing this, part of it is for her, of course, but a lot of it is also for her daughter, because she wants her daughter to get married in a good house, and she wants her daughter somewhere which can be safe, and that if they built a new house on the property, everything would be perfect. So you really see like her role as a mother. Like her role as a mother isn't just all like the work around the house that she does. Her role as a mother is standing up for her children and standing up for herself and making her will known and like set in stone in a time where it seems almost impossible.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point. Also, I think another good point in the story is that it shows a complex relationship between two individuals, right? It's not just all black and white. It's not the mother is good, the father is bad, the father is good, the mother is bad. Nothing like that. These are two people that clearly love each other so much, right? And you can see that because the mother, when her daughter kind of speaks up about the father, like she's like, how am I going to get married in this house? The mother, even though she has the same concern, she tells her daughter, like, you need to have respect for your dad. Like, he's done so much for us. He works every single day. Like, many other girls your age are working already. But your dad working right now is like preventing you from doing that.
Yeah.
So you should be grateful. And then not only that, she comes home and like cooks her favorite meal for him, even while she's like moving into the barn and like kind of performing this act of rebellion. It's clear to see that like she never means to cause harm to her husband. Instead, she's trying to do what's best for the family.
Yeah.
And even her husband, it's also clear that he loves her very much. Even though he kind of like dismisses her words at the beginning, he kind of realizes the weight of his mistake and the weight of his actions at the end when he just breaks down into tears and he's like, don't worry, I will build absolutely anything for you. Anything you need, just tell me and I'll do it, because he realizes how much this means to his wife. So I thought that was particularly well done. Also, building off the point of the whole like father-mother thing, it's clear to see like this woman, like Sahana said, has such a strong will and like determination, and this boundless like love for her children as well. And it's kind of like seen in like she's very headstrong, but it's kind of like this disguised headstrongness, which is also present in Penance of the Goddess, where you think like these women aren't standing up for themselves because they're stereotypically quiet, or what we see as quiet. They're really not. Like their actions speak way louder than their words.
They have like both of the women in these stories, they have this resistance, they have this strength like carved into them, carved out of stone, and it's with that resistance that they like release themselves from the restrictions that are placed on them. And like I feel like what your thing about how they're a really loving wife and husband, I feel like that's illustrated because at the end they would say like, he was like a fortress whose walls had no active resistance and went down the instant the right besieging tools were used. Like he never was actively opposing her idea. He was just like, oh, this is just stuff. Like she's just complaining. It's not a big deal. And then when she showed him this is a big deal, he's just like, okay.
It's kind of like he can't even bear the fact that like he caused so much like pain to his wife.
Yeah, and on the other hand, Penance of the Goddess seems a lot opposite. Like his personality, the husband's personality in Penance of the Goddess couldn't be more opposite, and that's why the penance continues. That's why her grandson continues her penance, because the result of it hasn't been achieved yet. So although they draw on similar themes, they don't have similar resolutions, and I find both the resolutions of these stories, although like this one can be quite saddening. It can be kind of sad to think about the fact that she never did sing in front of him. Like she never really got that freedom that she wanted. Even though that's really sad to think about, you also just like marvel at the strength she must have shown, the strength she had to be like, I will not sing for you anymore, because that is how I gain my freedom.
It's kind of like this really strong resolve. Like I put my mind to this and that's what's going to happen. And that is incredible to see.
Yeah, like this quiet and strong resolve. So both of these stories, they generally have these like incredibly strong themes about these like strong women who like manage to complete their penance in their own kind of way. So I would highly recommend reading both of these stories. They're so enjoyable to read, and they definitely left me with feeling so many emotions. So highly recommend, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.